Good afternoon and welcome to the Oxford Analytica video briefing. I'm Yulia Rusanova and today we'll be discussing the military coup that just took place in Thailand. I'm joined by Dr. Megha Kumar, our Deputy Director of Analysis and Senior Asia Pacific Analyst. Welcome.
Thank you.
Megha, tell us a bit more about what took place today in Thailand.
So the military officially overthrew the caretaker administration this morning. Among other things, it has suspended the constitution. It has also suspended all democratic political processes. And this comes 2 days after the military stepped in to enforce martial law across the country. At the time, it stopped short of a formal coup because the caretaker administration was still in place. But today, the coup, if you will, is complete.
And what type of political consequences and implications are we talking about here?
Well, several. As you know, Thailand has been down this road several times in the past, most recently in 2006. And we can see a range of outcomes in the coming days and months. The most important risk is, of course, of violence. Red shirt protesters who support the Thai party, which was the incumbent, and its leader, especially Thaksin Shinawatra, have so far been quite disciplined and restrained. The crisis began in November last year, and since then there have been a few fatalities, unfortunately, and there have been clashes on the streets and some roadside attacks. But in the light of Thailand's recent history, this time the crisis has been relatively peaceful. However, today the coup has happened, and we are waiting to hear from the red shirt leadership on how it will sort of assess the situation. The military this morning dispersed the protest rally that red shirts were organizing on the outskirts of the capital, but it's possible that they could regroup in some of their strongholds in the northern provinces or in the northeast, but equally it's possible that they could return to Bangkok. So the risk of violence is serious. The other, I think, a slightly more positive outcome would be if the military managed to broker some kind of an agreement, some consensus between the various political factions. And the key players here would be, of course, the Thai party, the main opposition Democrats, who have thus far been reluctant to endorse overtly anti-democratic measures, but at the same time they demand electoral reforms before another round of parliamentary elections can be held. Then the other key player, of course, is the People's Democratic Reform Committee, which was formed in late October last year, with the singular purpose of bringing down what they call Thaksin's political machinery. So it's quite unclear what it is they're after in terms of electoral reforms, political reforms, what kind of polity they seek. Some of their demands have been rather undemocratic. For example, recently they demanded a completely appointed legislature because they did not want the PTP to come back to power in another electoral cycle. So these various factions are quite so far displayed a level of rigidity, and it's the problem becomes worse because they also don't have a clear idea of what they want. So the military could, now that it's put itself in the middle of the political crisis, decide to call fresh elections. That could happen in a few months, or it could take half a year, possibly even longer. Last time in 2006, when the military overthrew the government, it took almost 2 years for fresh elections to be held. So the military might appoint a civilian interim prime minister and a caretaker government. The person who leads such a dispensation may or may not be from a military background. And the military will then have to use this time to broker some kind of an agreement, because I think all parties now realize that the same cycle of allowing the PTP or one of its variants to come to power after a fair and square election victory is clearly unacceptable to part of the Bangkok elite. But at the same time, rural voters always vote the PTP back. So this cycle of having democratic elections, then having street protests and clashes, then a coup is obviously not the way forward, and it's not a sustainable solution. So I hope that this time the discussions around the negotiating table will be not just aimed at resolving the crisis in the near term, but also will look at some longer term strategies to avoid being in a similar situation 5 years, 6 years from now.
And as far as the outlook for Thailand's economy and its investment climate goes, how do you assess that?
Well, the economy grew almost negligibly in the first 3 months of this year. We are concerned that the economy would not grow more than 2% for the entire 2014 year. And we've already seen the Finance Ministry and the Bank of Thailand downgrade its growth forecast, their growth forecasts several times already. You know, Thailand was on course for about 5% growth this year before the crisis began, but now we are looking at below 2%. And the problem is that some of the structural things that have changed in the last few months since the crisis began will now may well be hard to overturn very easily. You know, for example, consumer confidence has declined really sharply since November. Private investment has shrunk considerably. Budget disbursements are way off target. You know, the target for the year was 24%. Right now it's close to 19%. So the economy is just about scraping through. But if we don't have a functioning government by the start of the 2014-2015 fiscal year, which is on the 1st of October, then, you know, it's only to be expected that major decisions with regard to government investment will be delayed. Already the infrastructure plan that the PTP had in mind has been deferred. Maybe it will be completely removed from the table, you know, but that depends on the next government and what its priorities are. But the risk has already been significant. Tourism, obviously, which is an important component of the Thai economy, is at risk. So far, coastal areas, which are the sort of hotspots of tourism, have not been affected. But should violence spread, there is no reason to think that those areas would be safe. A lot of foreign governments have already issued travel advisories. And then, of course, is the issue of global supply chains. You know, so far the central provinces have been quite peaceful. That's where the Thai auto sector is located primarily, as well as Thai electronic industry, which is very, very crucial to global supply chains. But then again, if the security situation deteriorates, say if the airports in Bangkok are sealed temporarily, or if there are violent protests on the outskirts of Bangkok, even in the financial district in the heart of the capital, then of course investor confidence is going to take a major hit. Already we've seen some companies, especially Japanese auto companies like Toyota, suggest that they might accelerate their plans to diversify their global supply chains beyond Thailand, and they're looking at a country like Indonesia, for example. I think this is an important time for investors to reconsider their strategies and, you know, look at diversification in a much more serious way, because in the last few years the region has been affected by a range of political problems as well as natural disasters. So the response to natural disasters, for example, like the earthquake in Japan, led a lot of companies to reconsider this sort of intensive concentration on one country, one district for their inputs. But now political risk must factor in as one of those important determinants of how investors invest, at what speed, and whether they can leverage their broader regional networks and business acumen to avoid this kind of contingency. And like I said at the beginning, Thailand has been here before several times, and if the negotiations this time around don't look towards longer term solutions, then there is no guarantee that we wouldn't be here in 5 years or 6 years, or if not sooner. So I think this is a major concern, and investors should bear that in mind. And this is obviously a major concern for the Thai economy itself, because the biggest stakeholders, the biggest losers, if you will be people back home.
Megha, thank you very much for those insights.
Thank you, Yulia.
This is Yulia Rusanova for the Oxford Analytica video briefing.